It was October 12th, 1974, and New York City was gearing up for a show unlike anything it had ever seen before. At the Felt Forum inside the legendary Madison Square Garden, around 4,500 people packed the seats, buzzing with anticipation. This wasn't a boxing match or a rock concert. It was something new that was starting to claim its own spotlight. Mr. Olympia, the contest that crowned the greatest bodybuilder on the planet. The atmosphere was electric, as if the city itself knew it was about to witness a brand new chapter in sports history. The world outside the arena was going through intense times. Just months earlier, Richard Nixon had resigned from the presidency over the Watergate scandal. Meanwhile, Muhammad Ali and George Foreman were preparing for their legendary Rumble in the Jungle in Zaire. On the music charts, Elton John and Led Zeppelin were dominating. It was an era where sports, politics, and culture collided in a kind of unstoppable wave. And right in the middle of it all, bodybuilding was stepping out of the shadows and learning how to shine as pure entertainment. Up until then, the Olympia had been seen as a sort of bold experiment, a niche event for die-hard fans. But 1974 changed that completely. Thanks to the prestige of Madison Square Garden, one of the most iconic venues in the world, the contest finally gained the status of a major cultural happening. It was like bodybuilding had officially earned its spot on the sports calendar. Suddenly, fans, the press, and even casual onlookers began to look at the stage in a whole new way. Specialized magazines were already calling the 1974 edition the Super Bowl of bodybuilding. And honestly, it wasn't an exaggeration. The storylines around the competitors were told like modern gladiator tales, where muscle, charisma, and discipline would be tested under the bright lights. The crowd wasn't just there to see sculpted physiques. They wanted to witness personalities that could inspire and move them. That's always been Olympia's secret sauce, turning men into legends right in front of the audience. Of course, back then bodybuilding was still battling plenty of stereotypes. To many, it was just a weird subculture of overly muscular guys. But 1974 marked a turning point. For the first time, outlets like Sports Illustrated decided to cover the event seriously, giving it credibility and sparking mainstream curiosity. That kind of exposure helped cement Olympia as the sport's global showcase. The stage, the lights, and the crowd turned that night into something on par with a championship final. It was the moment to prove bodybuilding wasn't just about lifting weights in dim gyms. It was art, science, and entertainment, all rolled into one performance. And that recognition would open the door to a golden era, where names like Arnold Schwarzenegger would break out far beyond muscle magazines and into mainstream culture. Now think about this. What if Olympia hadn't taken that bold step in 1974? Would bodybuilding have conquered the world the way it did? That's the beauty of this story. What was once a fringe pursuit managed to present itself as a global spectacle. And that fall in New York, the audience was about to be swept away by one of the greatest battles of the golden era. Until 1974, bodybuilding was seen as eccentric, almost like a hobby for guys obsessed with their muscles. But everything began to shift when mainstream media started paying closer attention to Olympia. For the first time, big-name publications like Sports Illustrated sent reporters to cover it. And this wasn't some tiny sidebar. It was feature coverage, with striking photos, detailed descriptions, and comparisons to established sports heroes. That legitimacy gave bodybuilding a sense of seriousness and respect it had never had before. Journalist Richard W. Johnston from Sports Illustrated even described Arnold Schwarzenegger as the most extraordinary athlete in the world and the most perfectly developed man in history. That quote went global and helped build the myth. Bodybuilding stopped being just a physical curiosity and became a symbol of discipline, aesthetics, and performance. The coverage was so compelling it pulled in readers who had never cared about the sport before. Suddenly, talking about muscle contests didn't seem so strange anymore. At the same time, the leader magazines, like Muscle Builder/Power, were working hard to frame the event in epic terms. They didn't portray athletes as simple competitors, but as modern gladiators in a battle of titans. The colorful spreads, packed with dramatic photos, fueled the imagination of young readers all over the world, inspiring them to dream of one day stepping on the Olympia stage. It was powerful marketing that turned bodybuilding into pure spectacle. And there was one more explosive ingredient in the mix: the book Pumping Iron. Written by Charles Gaines with photography by George Butler, it was about to hit the shelves just weeks after the 1974 Olympia. The book pulled back the curtain on the sport, showing training sessions, rivalries, and human stories that went way beyond the muscles. The timing couldn't have been better. People reading about Arnold in Sports Illustrated were about to dive even deeper into the myth with pumping iron. That mix of media exposure created something brand new. For the first time, bodybuilding was being taken seriously outside of its hardcore niche. It wasn't just for guys who lived in gyms or collected training magazines anymore. Now, sports journalists and everyday readers were discovering that behind every pose on stage there was emotion, rivalry, and even drama. Olympia was starting to break into pop culture. The reaction was instant. On the streets of New York, people talked about the event as if it were a playoff game or a big-time boxing match. Arnold's name no longer belonged only to the world of iron. It started popping up on TV shows and even in mainstream entertainment, like his guest appearance on a Lucille Ball special. Bodybuilding, once stuck on the margins, was making its way into living rooms, casual conversations, and the pages of major newspapers. That moment marked a real turning point. Suddenly, the sport wasn't just about lifting weights. It was about telling stories that could inspire millions. And here's the question: would bodybuilding have ever reached such a global impact if it hadn't gotten that spotlight in 1974? Probably not. It was the media that gave the spectacle a voice, turning athletes into legends and Olympia into a worldwide stage. The 1974 Olympia also introduced a change that might have looked minor at first, but it completely reshaped the sport: the creation of two weight classes. For the first time, competitors weren't all thrown together into a single lineup. The stage was split into over 200 pounds and up to 200 pounds. On paper, it might sound like a technicality, but in reality, it was a game changer, making the contest fairer, more diverse, and able to celebrate different types of physiques. Before that, smaller bodybuilders had to battle against giants carrying 40 or 50 extra pounds of mass. Guys like Zane, who prioritized aesthetics and symmetry, were often overshadowed by sheer size. With the new split, symmetry, balance, and refinement suddenly had as much value as raw muscle. It was a clear sign that Olympia was maturing, recognizing that there was more than one way to embody physical perfection. In the under 200 class, fans got to witness a legendary showdown: Franco Columbu versus Zane. Two completely different visions of bodybuilding. Franco embodied raw power in a compact, dense frame with freakish strength. Zayn, on the other hand, stood for classical aesthetics, clean lines, razor-sharp proportions, almost like a work of art. The division allowed both men to shine on equal ground, without being buried under the shadow of the bigger monsters. Meanwhile, in the over 200 division, the spotlight was all about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno. This was the clash of giants: wide chests, monumental arms, physiques so massive they stunned even casual fans. The split gave the audience two different shows in one night. On one side, density versus aesthetics. On the other, a battle of titans for the ultimate crown. The ripple effect of that change went far beyond 1974. For the rest of the decade, the weight split stayed in place, reinforcing the idea that bodybuilding wasn't just bigger is better. From that point on, it was clear there was room for multiple body types, and the real beauty of the sport was in its variety of styles. This opened doors for lighter athletes to carve their names into history as well. Looking back, it's fascinating how that decision foreshadowed the future. Today, divisions like classic physique and men's physique exist specifically to celebrate different frames and ideals. In other words, that move in 1974 planted the seed for the diversity we see in modern bodybuilding. Olympia proved it could adapt, showing both vision and respect for the talent across the board. And here's a fun thought: what would you have enjoyed more? The sheer dominance of Arnold versus Lou, or the technical finesse of Franco against Zayn? That weight split didn't just give more athletes a chance. It gave the audience a double feature: two battles in one night, each showing a different face of the art of sculpting the human body. By 1974, Arnold Schwarzenegger was no longer just another competitor. He was the man to beat, the standard against which everyone else was measured. weighing in somewhere between 237 and 245 pounds of solid muscle. The Austrian displayed an almost impossible combination of size, definition, and symmetry. Many experts say that was the true peak of his competitive career, when every single detail of his physique hit a perfect balance. Arnold didn't dominate the spotlight just with his physique, but with something no training routine could ever teach: charisma. When he walked on stage, it felt like the atmosphere shifted. The crowd reacted almost instinctively, as if they were looking at a movie star instead of an athlete. His smile, his posture, his confidence. He had the audience in the palm of his hand before even hitting his first pose. That magnetism was a secret weapon, one that set him apart from everyone else. Another key factor was his psychological edge over rivals. Arnold had the uncanny ability to turn every comparison into a mental battle. He'd mimic his opponent's poses, but do them better. He'd lock eyes, flash that superior grin, and silently send the message: "You've already lost." That emotional chess game was just as effective as his 22-inch arms. Plenty of competitors walked in confident, but walked off stage shaken after facing him under the bright lights. At the 1974 Olympia, this strategy was on full display in his showdown with Lou Ferrigno. While the young newcomer was trying to prove himself, Arnold seemed to toy with the moment. He knew he had the experience, refinement, and stage presence to break down the confidence of the 6'5" giant. The crowd could feel that contrast, and it only added to the aura of invincibility surrounding the champ. His physique that year spoke volumes too. His chest was massive, his arms looked like they were carved from marble, and his back stretched out so wide it practically cast a shadow over his rivals. Critics had often pointed to his legs as a weak spot, but in 1974 even that seemed balanced within the overall package. He showcased a body that was huge, harmonious, and aesthetic all at once, a rare combination for that era. Arnold also carried an unbeatable track record. Since debuting at Olympia in 1969, he had only lost once, to the legendary Cuban, Sergio Oliva. From then on, he stacked up consecutive victories, building his image as the true emperor of bodybuilding. By 1974, defending his title for the fifth time wasn't just a goal. It felt like a formality for someone who had already conquered everything. And here's the big question: what made Arnold so different? Was it just his gifted genetics? Or the way he combined muscle, presence, and psychology? Maybe it was all of it together. The truth is, on that night in 1974, the audience wasn't just watching an athlete compete. They were watching a living legend, someone destined to leave a permanent mark on the history of the sport. While Arnold Schwarzenegger reigned as the four-time defending Mr. Olympia, the spotlight was also shifting toward a new name: Lou Ferrigno. At just 22 years old, the New Yorker had already won 2 Mr. Universe titles, achievements that created massive buzz around his Olympia debut. Many saw him as Arnold's natural successor, the man who could kick off a new era. His sheer size grabbed attention instantly. Lou stood 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighed about 260 pounds. He was a true giant, a body so massive it seemed to push the limits of what was humanly possible. For fans, just seeing this colossus finally stand toe-to-toe with Arnold was a spectacle in itself, the promise of a historic showdown. The magazines hyped it, the fans spread the word, and the anticipation kept building. But with that hype came pressure. Lou was still young and inexperienced, and stepping on stage against someone of Arnold's caliber wasn't just about muscles. It was about confidence. Many compared their clash to the classic duel between master and apprentice. Fans wanted to see if the rookie had the guts and maturity to face the legend as an equal. Yet one detail hurt Lou's performance in 1974: his prep. Just days before the Olympia, he had competed in and won another Mr. Universe in Verona, Italy, showcasing a massive, full physique. But in trying to come in sharper for Olympia, Lou pushed his diet too far and lost some of the density that made him so imposing. The result was still a huge body, but one that didn't deliver the knockout impact fans expected. That mistake gave Arnold all the room he needed to exploit his experience. While Lou fought to steady his poses, Arnold looked completely at ease, mirroring the younger rival's moves but executing them better. To the audience, it was obvious. The difference wasn't just in the muscle. It was in stage mastery, in the ability to project confidence. Lou was a giant, but he hadn't yet learned how to use his size as a weapon. Even so, Lou's debut can't be called a failure. On the contrary, it cemented his spot on the global bodybuilding radar. The image of Lou standing next to Arnold became iconic, reinforcing the narrative of the time. The present and the future sharing the same stage. Even in defeat, Lou gained the status of a rising star, someone who, with maturity and adjustments, could eventually reach the top. When the lights came up and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno faced each other, the crowd knew they were about to witness something special. It wasn't just a muscle contest. It felt like a clash of eras. On one side, the established champion. On the other, the young giant full of promise. The atmosphere inside the Felt Forum was more like a prize fight, with every pose being studied like a decisive punch. With each pose called by the judges, the contrast became clear. Lou impressed with his height and width, commanding the stage with his sheer size. But when Arnold struck the same pose, the audience saw more. Tighter proportions, sharper detail, and a confidence that made every movement seem effortless. It was as if the Austrian turned every pose into a piece of art, while Lou was still trying to steady his presentation. Arnold, ever the strategist, unleashed a devastating psychological tactic. He mimicked Lou's poses, but executed them better, making the difference between experience and inexperience obvious. When Lou flexed his biceps, Arnold grinned and hit the same shot with deeper definition. When the giant showcased his chest, Arnold responded with a fuller, more symmetrical one. That silent game became a spectacle in itself. The audience reacted every step of the way. Each time Arnold outshined Lou in the same pose, the crowd erupted with applause and cheers. Fans still supported Lou, appreciating the charisma of his debut, but their eyes were locked on Arnold's almost theatrical confidence. He seemed to control the entire night. One especially symbolic moment came when the two turned directly toward each other in a side-by-side arm shot, veins popping, sweat dripping under the hot lights. Arnold locked eyes with Lou and smiled. Just a simple gesture, but devastating. It was psychological victory captured in a single glance. The crowd got it instantly. This wasn't just provocation. It was proof that Arnold dominated not only with his body, but with his mind. Despite Lou's imposing frame, the head-to-head comparison made it clear Arnold was on another level. His muscles had more density, his details were sharper, and his stage presence was magnetic. Ferrigno still looked like a rough diamond, full of potential but not polished enough to shine against a champion at his absolute peak. In the end, there was no doubt. Lou Ferrigno may have lost on stage, but his debut produced iconic moments that would be remembered for generations. And Arnold, with his physical and psychological dominance, further cemented his legend. That showdown proved to the world that Olympia wasn't just about muscle. It was about emotion, strategy, and pure spectacle. After all, how would you have reacted if you'd been there, watching a champion smile at his opponent and, in that instant, win the battle without saying a single word? While Arnold and Lou stole the spotlight in the main division, the 1974 Olympia also delivered another unforgettable clash. The showdown between Franco Columbu and Zane in the brand new under 200-pound class. This wasn't just strength against strength. It was a collision of styles, a battle between two completely different philosophies of bodybuilding. On one side, Columbu's raw, almost animal-like density. On the other, Zane's classical elegance. Franco Columbu, Arnold's inseparable training partner, was known for his freakish strength. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches and weighing around 181 pounds, he seemed to pack a ton of muscle into a compact frame. His lats were thick, his chest looked carved from stone, and his strength was legendary. He could move weights that intimidated men far larger than him. On stage, he radiated raw power, with a physique that was short, stocky, and intensely muscular. Zayn followed the opposite path. Taller and leaner, at about 5 feet 9 inches and 190 pounds, he carried a physique many called artistic. His lines were clean, his narrow waist created a harmonious silhouette, and his symmetry was almost mathematical. Zayn didn't intimidate with size, he captivated with proportion. His body showed that bodybuilding could be beautiful, almost poetic, instead of just overwhelming. When the two stepped on stage together, the contrast was striking. Franco showed off dense muscle that seemed to pop under the lights, while Zayn leaned on fluid posing and refined aesthetics. It was like comparing a Greek statue to a solid block of granite. The audience was split. Some were impressed by Columbu's compact power, while others applauded Zayn's visual grace. The battle was close, and the judges faced a real dilemma. Which should matter more? Franco's extreme muscular density or Zayn's aesthetic harmony? In the end, the scales tipped slightly in Columbu's favor. His thickness and power earned him the win in the under 200-pound class, though by a razor-thin margin. For Franco, it was a major milestone, finally stepping out of the shadow of his Austrian friend Arnold. But Zayn's loss wasn't really a defeat. In fact, it marked the start of something bigger. Many realized that his style had a future. Aesthetics and symmetry were beginning to gain real traction with the judges, and just a few years later, Zayn would prove it by winning 3 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles. What looked like a minor detail in 1974 would spark a full-on aesthetic revolution in the sport. That showdown leaves us with a powerful question. What is the true essence of bodybuilding? Is it Franco's brute force and muscle density, or Zayn's classical beauty and balance? When the lights finally dimmed and the judges delivered their verdicts, the night of October 12, 1974, was etched into bodybuilding history. In the under 200 division, as mentioned, Franco Columbu was declared the champion after his grueling clash with Zayn. It was a narrow victory, but it gave him not just a trophy, but a permanent place among the sport's greats. For the first time, he could raise the Olympia Cup with pride, proving he wasn't just Arnold's loyal sidekick. In the over 200 class, the outcome was almost inevitable. Despite the hype around Lou's debut, the young giant couldn't overcome Arnold Schwarzenegger's experience and stage mastery. The Austrian was announced the winner without question, cementing once again his spot as the most dominant man in bodybuilding. With both division champions decided, only the overall title remained, the crown that named the best physique of the night. The Felt Forum buzzed with suspense, but when Arnold's name thundered through the loudspeakers, the crowd erupted. The Austrian oak had captured his 5th consecutive Mr. Olympia, stretching his legend even further. The prize money for the champion was $1,000, an amount that might sound modest today, but back then it carried huge symbolic weight. More than the money, it was about public recognition. Standing on stage at Madison Square Garden, being celebrated as the best in the world in front of thousands of people, that was priceless. Franco Columbu, meanwhile, left that night knowing he had finally secured his place among the giants. His victory in the under 200 class proved that even smaller athletes had room at the top of Olympia. It was just the beginning, as Franco would later go on to claim the overall title in future years, showing that his power and determination extended well beyond Arnold's shadow. Lou, though defeated, also left with something valuable: recognition. His runner-up spot in the heavyweight division firmly put him on the global bodybuilding map. The image of Lou standing side by side with Arnold would become iconic, remembered to this day as one of the great duels of the golden era. By the end of that night, the 1974 Olympia had not only crowned champions, but cemented a pivotal moment in the sport's history. Arnold reigned supreme, Franco carved out his place, and Lou emerged as a promise for the future. It was more than just a contest. It was proof that bodybuilding had reached a new level of importance and visibility. The 1974 Olympia is still remembered as one of the most legendary contests in bodybuilding history. For many experts, this was the most imposing version of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the absolute peak of his competitive form. His massive yet balanced physique, combined with unmatched charisma, turned that victory into a kind of ultimate crown. It felt like he had reached the final form of the Austrian oak, untouchable by any rival. Lou, despite losing, walked off stage with his image solidified. At just 22, he showed he had a bright future ahead. Even without the title, he became a cultural icon and, soon after, achieved worldwide fame as the Incredible Hulk on television. His Olympia debut was the start of a career that proved the sport could create figures who transcended the stage and influenced pop culture. Another key factor was how the media became bodybuilding's window to the world. Sports Illustrated's respectful coverage, the relentless storytelling from Weider magazines, and the release of Pumping Iron right after the contest transformed bodybuilding into a global spectacle. What had once been limited to gyms and small competitions now had space in major newspapers, magazines, and soon, on the big screen. It's no wonder so many people call the 1974 Olympia the Battle of the Titans. That stage brought together different styles, powerful personalities, and clashes that felt straight out of a sports epic. Arnold stood as the unbeatable champion, Lou, the giant promise, Franco, the compact powerhouse, and Zayn, the embodiment of classical aesthetics. Each of them added to a show that went far beyond the pursuit of trophies. The event also highlighted the transformative power of bodybuilding in the golden era. At a time when the sport still faced prejudice, 1974 proved to the world that muscles weren't just about vanity. They were about discipline, art, and dedication. From that point on, young people all over the globe began to see weight training as something aspirational, a path to transforming not just their bodies but their lives. The impact was so massive that even today this edition is remembered with reverence. Many fans see 1974 as the true turning point, when Olympia stopped being just a sports event and became a full-fledged cultural phenomenon. And that brings us to the end of this incredible journey through the 1974 Mr. Olympia, the contest remembered as the true Battle of the Titans. A night that crowned Arnold Schwarzenegger at his very best, introduced Lou to the world as the next big promise, gave Franco Columbu his long-awaited spotlight, and proved that bodybuilding had finally earned the respect of both the media and the public. But now I want to hear from you. What do you think was the most unforgettable moment of this edition? Was it the head-to-head duel between Arnold and Lou? Franco's razor-thin victory over Zayn? Or the historic impact this night left on the entire sport? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective keeps the memory of the golden era alive and makes this conversation even richer. If this video brought you value, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel and shows us it's worth continuing to bring you these epic stories. And if you're not subscribed yet, take a second right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapters in our Olympia timeline. And for those who want to go even further, consider becoming a channel member. Here, we're not just telling stories, we're building a living archive of the sport's history together. Your engagement, whether it's a comment, a like, or sharing this video, is what keeps the flame alive and helps us reach more fans across the globe. And of course, don't stop here. On the end screen, you'll find the link to another video on the channel, where we dive deep into another legendary edition of the Olympia. I'm sure you'll be surprised by the stories, rivalries, and behind-the-scenes moments that shaped bodybuilding. So you already know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, become a member, and keep going with us on this time travel journey. The Olympia stage has plenty more epic battles waiting, and I'll see you in the next video as we continue exploring each chapter of this amazing story together.